The wolves came at dusk. Catherine Kate Hargrove crouched in the doorway of her half-built cabin, the November wind tearing through the canvas that served as the fourth wall. Three children pressed against her back like birds beneath a wing. Her hands gripped the axe handle until her knuckles went white as bone. "Mama," Timothy whispered, 8 years old and trying to be brave. Behind him, 6-year-old Ruth clutched 4-year-old Clara to her chest, eyes wide with fear. "Hush now." Kate's voice remained steady, though her body trembled. "Whatever happens, you stay behind me." 4 yellow eyes gleamed at the tree line, testing, watching, maybe more behind them. One wolf growled low, the sound of hunger-given voice. The first heavy snowfall had come early this year to the Montana Territory, 1885. Game was scarce, driving predators closer to human settlements. Kate shifted her weight, calculating her odds. She couldn't outrun them, couldn't fight them all, but she could buy time. She could be the wall between death and her children. "Close your eyes, babies," she whispered, raising the axe as the lead wolf gathered itself to spring. Then hoofbeats broke the frozen air. A rider crested the ridge, silhouette sharp against the dying light. He sat easy in the saddle, rifle laid across his lap like it belonged there. The wolves paused, ears flat. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, walked forward with the calm of someone who'd faced worse than wolves. Tall, lean, weathered, 40 winters at least, maybe more. His face bore a long scar down his left cheek, and his eyes, a startling blue, held the kind of wariness that came from hard experience. "Ma'am," he said, voice like gravel worn smooth. "Step aside." Kate shook her head. "Not while they're behind me." Something passed between them, recognition of a certain kind of courage, or maybe stubbornness. "Then I'll stand in front of both of you." He raised his rifle and fired once into the sky. The wolves scattered like smoke. Kate's knees buckled, the axe clattering to the frozen ground. The stranger caught her before she fell, one arm around her shoulders, the other reaching for little Clara who'd started to cry. "You're safe now," he said. Kate wanted to believe him, wanted to collapse into those words and rest. But she'd learned the hard way that safety was something you built yourself, log by log, or it wasn't safety at all. She straightened, pulling away from his support. "Thank you, Mr. Caleb Thornton." His gaze traveled over the cabin, 3 walls solid, the fourth merely canvas stretched over timber frames. "Storm's coming." "That won't hold." Kate lifted her chin. "We'll manage." Caleb studied her face, then the children peeking from behind her skirts. His expression softened almost imperceptibly when he looked at Timothy, who stared back defiantly. "Let me help," Caleb said, the words seeming to surprise even him. "I can finish that wall before the real cold sets in." Timothy stepped forward. "We don't need help. I can do it." Kate placed a hand on her son's shoulder. Pride warred with practicality in her chest. Winter in Montana was unforgiving. Andrew had known that, had rushed to finish the cabin before the mine, before everything changed. "Why would you help strangers?" she asked. Caleb looked away, toward the darkening forest. "Maybe I'm not helping strangers." Something in his tone raised the hair on Kate's neck. Before she could question him further, little Clara broke free and toddled toward him, curious despite her earlier tears. "Clara, come back," Kate called, but Caleb had already crouched to the child's level. "Hello there, little one," he said, his voice gentler than seemed possible from such a weathered man. Clara reached out and touched the scar on his cheek, unafraid. "Owie." "Old Owie," he corrected, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "All better now." Kate watched the interaction, confused by the mix of wariness and ease she felt around this stranger. "You can stay for supper," she found herself saying. "But we'll see about the rest." Caleb nodded once, respecting her caution. He carried in firewood, built up the fire with hands that knew their work. The children stared at him with wide, wondering eyes. "Who are you?" Timothy asked bluntly, after they'd eaten a simple meal of cornbread and rabbit stew. Caleb settled his hat on a nail. "Just passing through." But he laid his bedroll by the door that night, standing watch while Kate drifted into exhausted sleep. Through half-closed eyes, she saw him check his rifle, staring out into the darkness. Not passing through then, staying. Morning came cold and bright. Kate woke to the smell of coffee. The sound of children laughing outside pulled her from the blankets in alarm. But when she rushed to the door, she found Caleb teaching Timothy how to split kindling. Ruth was gathering his pieces in her apron while Clara built a lopsided pile. Caleb handed Kate a tin cup without meeting her eyes. "They were up early," he said, as if in apology. Her hand shook slightly as she accepted the cup. From cold or fear or gratitude, she couldn't say. She wanted to thank him for last night, for this morning, for letting her sleep, but the words stuck in her throat. "No need for thanks, ma'am," Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts. "About that wall," Kate's jaw tightened. "I know. Let me finish it." Pride flared hot in her chest. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for pay." He gestured toward the unfinished section. "Week's work, maybe 10 days if the weather holds." Kate stared at the wall, then at her children, happier than she'd seen them in months. She thought of the long winter ahead, of wolves and cold and being alone. "Why, ma'am?" she asked finally. "Why help us?" Caleb turned toward the ridge where a wooden cross marked Andrew's grave. His expression darkened with something Kate couldn't read. "Because someone should have," he said simply. That afternoon, a wagon rattled up the path. Mrs. Margaret Evans from town, widow herself but with a pension and a sharp tongue. She took one look at Caleb working on the wall and her eyes narrowed to slits. "Didn't know you had help, Catherine." "Just a neighbor lending a hand," Kate said evenly. Mrs. Evans sniffed. "I'm sure." She climbed back onto her wagon without offering assistance of her own. "Town will be interested to hear." When she'd gone, Kate turned to Caleb. "You don't have to do this. People will talk." He hammered another nail with more force than necessary. "People always talk." That night, while the children slept, Kate found Caleb sitting by the fire, whittling something small from a piece of pine. His large hands worked with surprising delicacy, the knife moving in sure, practiced strokes. "What are you making?" she asked, settling across from him. He held up a small wooden horse, delicate and fine. "For the little one. Clara will love it." Kate watched his hands resume their work. "Where did you learn to carve like that?" "My father taught me." A shadow crossed his face. "Long time ago." "You're good with children," Kate observed. "Do you have any of your own?" His knife stilled. The silence stretched. Kate immediately regretted the question. "Had a daughter," he said finally. "Would have been 10 now." The grief in his voice was raw, familiar. Kate's heart clenched. "I'm sorry." Fever took her, 3 years back. He set down the carving, staring at his hands. "I was away working. Got home to a grave." Kate met his eyes across the small room, saw her own grief reflected there. "My husband died in the mine collapse last spring," she offered. "We were arguing that morning about him working there." Her voice caught. "My last words to him were angry ones." Caleb nodded, understanding without needing more. "Hard thing to live with." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, each lost in memories of those they couldn't save. In the days that followed, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Caleb worked from dawn till dusk, adding not just the fourth wall, but reinforcing the others, building proper shutters for the windows, a stronger door that would keep out the wind. Kate worked alongside him when she wasn't tending to the children, learning the rhythm of hammer and saw, the satisfaction of building something meant to last. Timothy shadowed Caleb, eager to prove himself useful, while Ruth watched everything with solemn eyes, and Clara collected the wooden animals that began to populate the cabin's window ledge. A horse, a bear, a rabbit, each carved in the evening hours by Caleb's patient hands. One morning, Kate walked to Andrew's grave on the hill. The children played nearby, their voices carrying on the cold wind. She knelt, laying dried wildflowers on the frozen earth. "I'm trying, Andrew," she whispered, "but I'm so tired." Guilt pressed down like a hand on her shoulder. Guilt for accepting help. Guilt for noticing the way Caleb moved. Efficient, purposeful, kind. Guilt for the warmth that bloomed in her chest when he smiled at Clara. From the cabin below, Caleb paused in his hammering, watched her at the grave. When she returned, he worked in silence, respecting her grief without comment. That evening during supper, Clara climbed into Caleb's lap, surprising everyone. "Story?" she asked, looking up at him with trusting eyes. Caleb hesitated, looking to Kate for permission. At her nod, he began a tale about a bear who built a house in the forest, his deep voice painting pictures in the firelight. The children listened, enchanted, even Timothy forgetting to maintain his distance. Later, after the children were asleep, Kate found Caleb's coat hanging by the door. As she moved it to make room for kindling, something fell from the pocket, a folded paper, yellowed with age. Kate picked it up, intending to replace it, when her eye caught a familiar name, Andrew Hargrove, her husband's name, written in what looked like a letter. Kate's hand trembled. She knew she shouldn't read it, but her eyes seemed to move of their own accord. If anything happens to me, find Kate and the children. Promise me, Cal. The rest was obscured by a fold, but what she'd seen was enough. Kate quickly returned the letter to Caleb's pocket, mind reeling. Caleb knew Andrew. They were friends, close enough that Andrew had extracted a promise, and Caleb had waited 15 months to fulfill it. Why? Kate spent a restless night, questions churning. When morning came, she watched Caleb with new eyes, searching for clues, wondering what else he might be hiding. She didn't have to wait long for more revelations. A wagon approached around midday. Reverend Nathaniel Foster from town, ancient and bent but sharp-eyed. He dismounted slowly, studied the cabin with approval, then turned that sharp gaze on Caleb. "Storm's coming," he said without preamble. 2 days, maybe 3. That cabin won't hold." "It will," Caleb said, continuing his work. "Town's offering shelter to the widow Hargrove and her children," the Reverend continued, eyeing Caleb with suspicion. Kate stepped forward. "Thank you, Reverend. But no." The old man's mouth thinned. "Pride's a cold companion, Catherine." "So is charity," she retorted. The Reverend turned to Caleb. "You're bringing trouble on this family, stranger." Caleb met his stare. "I'm keeping them alive." The Reverend studied them both, Kate with her chin up, Caleb with his shoulders square. Something shifted in his expression. Not approval exactly, but recognition. "Ezra Wells is asking questions," he said quietly to Caleb, "about why you're here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Let him ask." "Wells owns half the town," the Reverend warned, "including that mine where Andrew died." Kate's breath caught. "What does Ezra Wells have to do with my husband?" The two men exchanged a look that sent ice through her veins. The Reverend sighed heavily. "Storm's coming regardless," he said, climbing back into his saddle. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Marshal Hayes is due through on his circuit next week. Might be worth having a word with him when he arrives." Caleb's head jerked up. "Hayes? Roland Hayes?" "The very same," the Reverend confirmed. "Good man. Doesn't bend to pressure or money. Been dealing with water disputes all through the territory." He gathered his reins. "Might be good to have your evidence ready for him." After he'd gone, Kate confronted Caleb. "What aren't you telling me?" Caleb returned to his work, but something had shifted in his demeanor. "Nothing that helps you now. But Hayes, I served with him during the war. If anyone will stand up to Wells, it's him. That's not for you to decide." Kate planted herself in front of him. "That letter in your pocket, I saw it. You knew Andrew." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You went through my things?" "It fell out," she defended. "Why did Andrew make you promise to find us? And why did you wait so long?" Caleb set down his hammer with deliberate care. "Some things are better left buried. Not when they concern my family." Kate's voice shook with anger and fear. "I deserve to know." They stood face to face, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Caleb nodded toward the cabin, not where the children can hear. Inside, he sat heavily at the table, running a hand through his graying hair. Kate waited, arms crossed, heart hammering. "Andrew and I worked together," Caleb began. "Not just in the mine. We were partners of a sort." "Partners in what?" "Finding things." His eyes met hers. "Valuable things." Understanding dawned. "You were prospecting." Caleb nodded. "Andrew had a knack for it. Found signs of gold where nobody else would look. Small deposits, but enough to build a future on." He paused. "Enough to attract attention." "Ezra Wells' attention," Kate guessed. "Wells wants to expand his mining operation. Needs land, your land, specifically." Caleb's expression hardened. Andrew wouldn't sell, even when Wells made it clear how dangerous refusing could be. Kate's hand went to her throat. "Are you saying The mine collapse wasn't an accident. Caleb's silence was answer enough. Why didn't you come sooner? Kate demanded, tears threatening. 15 months, Caleb. We nearly lost everything. I was injured in the collapse too, he said quietly. Then there was a woman and her baby I had to help escape from men like Wells. By the time I could come, he looked away. I wasn't sure you'd want the help of the man who couldn't save your husband. Kate sank into a chair, the weight of these revelations pressing on her. The children? Don't need to know, Caleb finished. Not yet. But Wells knows I'm here now, and he'll come. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the newly hung shutters. The promised storm was approaching, but Kate realized the real storm had been brewing long before Caleb arrived. That night, Caleb slept restlessly on his bedroll. In the darkness, Kate heard him murmur a name, Lily, his voice breaking even in sleep. His daughter, she realized. The one fever took. Everyone carried ghosts. Everyone built walls to keep their pain contained. But walls could keep people out too, the very ones who might help heal the broken places. Kate touched the wedding ring she wore on a chain around her neck, a simple band worn thin from Andrew's years of work. She thought of his final gift to her, sending Caleb to help when he couldn't be there himself. Perhaps it was time to accept that gift fully. The next morning, while Caleb split wood outside, Timothy approached Kate at the wash basin. Ma, he asked, uncharacteristically hesitant, is Mr. Thornton going to stay, even after the cabin's done? Kate paused, considering her son's face, so like Andrew's, but with her own stubborn chin. Would you mind if he did? For the winter, at least? Timothy kicked at the floor. He knows things about traps and tracking, things Pa was going to teach me. Kate's heart twisted. Your father would want you to learn those things. I know. Timothy looked up, his young face serious. But I still miss Tom. Kate pulled him close. We always will, Timmy. Having Mr. Thornton here doesn't change that. Timothy nodded against her shoulder. He's carving me a wolf, says I'm brave like one. Kate smiled, even as tears threatened. You are. Your father would be so proud. Outside, Ruth sat near Caleb as he worked, her small hands mimicking his movements on a piece of kindling. Clara had taken to following him like a shadow, clutching the wooden horse he'd carved. The scene sent an unexpected pang through Kate, a glimpse of what might have been if Andrew had lived, of what still might be if she allowed it. That afternoon, as the first snowflakes of the coming storm began to fall, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. 5 men, led by a portly figure in an expensive coat, Ezra Wells, owner of the mine, the bank, and most of Bitter Creek. Kate called the children inside, her heart racing. Caleb stood by the woodpile, his posture relaxed but his eyes watchful as the men approached. Wells reined in his horse, looking down his nose at the cabin, at Kate standing in the doorway, at Caleb by the woodpile. Mrs. Hargrove, he called, his voice oily with false concern. We've come to escort you to town before the storm hits. Reverend Foster mentioned you might need assistance. We're fine here, Mr. Wells, Kate replied evenly. Thank you for your concern. Wells' gaze shifted to Caleb. Thornton, thought you'd left these parts for good. Came back, Caleb said simply. So I see. Wells dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men, a quiet, dark-haired fellow Kate hadn't seen before. As the man took the reins, his eyes met Kate's briefly, a flicker of something like apology in them. He nodded almost imperceptibly before dropping his gaze. Wells approached Kate, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Mrs. Hargrove, I don't believe you understand the danger of your situation. I understand perfectly, Kate said, chin raised. My husband and I built this place. We're staying. Your husband, Wells said with feigned sadness, would want you safe, and I'm afraid you are not safe here, especially with certain elements present. He glanced meaningfully at Caleb. Timothy appeared at Kate's side. We don't need your help, he said, his child's voice brave but trembling. Wells's face hardened. Children should be seen, not heard. Caleb stepped forward then. You've delivered your message, Wells. Time for you to go. The men with Wells shifted on their horses, hands moving to their weapons. Kate's breath caught. Surely they wouldn't start violence with children present. There's a storm coming, Thornton, Wells said softly. More than one kind. Wouldn't want any accidents to befall Mrs. Hargrove and her lovely children. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Like what happened to your own family. Terrible thing, losing a child. Caleb went very still, his face a mask. Kate could see the barely contained rage in the set of his shoulders. That's enough, she said sharply. Please leave our property, Mr. Wells. Wells replaced his hat. Think carefully, Mrs. Hargrove, about your children's future, about what your husband would want. He mounted his horse. I'll call again after the storm. Perhaps you'll be more amenable then. As they rode away, snow beginning to fall in earnest, Kate turned to Caleb. What did he mean about your family? Caleb's expression was distant, pained. Another story for another time. He looked at the sky. Storm's here. We need to finish battening down. They worked in tense silence, securing the cabin for the coming blizzard. By nightfall, the wind howled around the eaves, snow piling against the walls. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows. The children huddled in blankets near the fire, subdued by the earlier confrontation. Clara climbed into Kate's lap, thumb in her mouth. Story? She asked, looking at Caleb. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. He settled in the chair opposite, but instead of his usual tale, he pulled something from his pocket, a small silver coin broken in half. Once, he began, his voice low, there were two friends who found a treasure. Kate listened, spellbound, as Caleb told of two young men who discovered a vein of silver, who split a coin as a token of their partnership, promising to always watch out for each other. How one friend married, started a family, while the other kept wandering. How they stayed true to their bond despite distance and time. The children hung on every word, but Kate understood the real story beneath. Caleb and Andrew, their friendship, their promise, or maybe a feast. When he finished, Clara was asleep in Kate's arms. Timothy stared at the half coin in Caleb's palm. What happened to the other half? He asked. Caleb closed his fingers around the coin. The other friend kept it, near his heart. Kate's hand went instinctively to her throat, to the chain that held not just Andrew's ring, but a silver half coin he'd never explained. Her eyes met Caleb's across the room, understanding flowing between them. Time for bed, she said softly to the children. Later, when the cabin was quiet save for the storm outside, Kate sat with Caleb by the fire. She pulled the chain from beneath her collar, showing him the half coin that matched his own. He never told me what it meant, she said. Just that it was important, that I should keep it safe. Caleb reached out, his calloused fingers nearly touching the coin, but stopping short. We were 18 when we found that first silver deposit. Thought we'd be rich. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Used part of it to buy a proper coin, cut it in half with a chisel. Childish, maybe. No, Kate said, it's beautiful. A symbol of trust. Trust I broke by not being there when the mine collapsed. Kate studied his face in the firelight. You're here now. Too late for Andrew. Not too late for his family. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, something fragile was taking shape. An understanding, a possibility. Kate returned the chain to her neck, the coin and ring settling against her skin. Wells won't stop, Caleb said after a while. He wants your land, and he's not a man used to being refused. What does he think is here? There's no mine on our property. Caleb stared into the fire. Maybe not a mine, but Andrew was onto something he thought was worth protecting. Worth dying for? Kate asked, her voice breaking. He didn't plan on dying, Kate. He planned on building a future. Caleb looked around the cabin. This place for you and the children. Kate followed his gaze. To the solid walls, the roof that didn't leak, the shuttered windows that kept out the howling wind. To Timothy and Ruth sleeping peacefully in their corner, Clara curled between them. To the line of wooden animals on the windowsill, carved with care and given with kindness. Help me protect it, she said suddenly. Stay. Not just for the winter. Help me understand what Andrew found, why it matters. Caleb's expression was unreadable in the flickering light. People will talk. People always talk, Kate echoed his earlier words. I don't care anymore. Something shifted in Caleb's eyes. A decision made, a wall beginning to crumble. I'll stay, he said simply, until it's safe. As they sat in companionable silence, the storm raging outside but powerless against the walls they'd built, Kate felt the weight of Andrew's ring against her skin. Not a burden now, but a connection. To the past she honored, to the future she would build, log by log, with those she chose to trust. In the morning, the storm would pass. Wells would return with threats or offers. The town would whisper and judge. But tonight, in this cabin made strong by shared labor and shared pain, they were safe. It was enough for now. And in the darkness, as Kate drifted towards sleep, she heard Caleb by the door, checking his rifle, standing watch, not passing through, but staying. 3 days after the blizzard, the world outside the cabin lay transformed beneath a pristine blanket of snow. The morning dawned clear and bitter cold, the kind that burned lungs and froze breath into crystals. Kate stood on the newly built porch, watching the children make snow angels in the yard, their laughter rising like smoke in the frigid air. Caleb emerged from the barn he'd improvised from fallen timber, carrying freshly split wood. "Coldest day yet," he remarked, stopping beside her row. "Winter's setting in early this year." Kate nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. "Will Wells come today, do you think?" Man like that doesn't let snow stop him when he wants something. Caleb's eyes scanned the horizon. "But he'll wait until he thinks the storm softened you up, made you desperate." "He doesn't know me very well then," Kate said with a hint of defiance. Caleb's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "No, he doesn't." Inside, Kate busied herself with breakfast while Caleb called the children in from the cold. Their cheeks were flushed, eyes bright with excitement. Winter had always been Timothy's favorite season, and his enthusiasm was infectious. "Ma, can we build a snow fort? Mr. Thornton says he'll help us." Timothy's earlier wariness of Caleb had thawed considerably since the night of the storm. "After chores," Kate replied, setting bowls of porridge on the table. "And only if Mr. Thornton has time." "Always time for a good fort," Caleb said, helping Clara out of her wet mittens. "Good practice for building real things." Ruth, quiet as always, slid onto the bench beside Caleb. Of the three children, she was the most observant, watching the adults with solemn eyes that missed nothing. Now she pushed a folded piece of paper toward Caleb. "I made this," she said softly. Caleb unfolded it to find a childish drawing of 4 figures standing before a cabin, with a 5th figure watching from above, surrounded by clouds. The family with Andrew looking down from heaven. And beside Kate stood a tall figure labeled in careful letters, "Mr. Thorne." "It's very fine," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Ruth." Kate, watching the exchange, felt a complicated surge of feelings. Grief for what her children had lost, gratitude for Caleb's gentle way with them, and something else, something warm and unsettling that she wasn't ready to name. After breakfast, while the children did their lessons at the table, Kate and Caleb conferred in low voices by the door. "We need to know exactly what Wells is after," Kate insisted. "You said Andrew found something valuable. What was it? Gold?" Caleb shook his head. "Not gold, at least not directly." He hesitated. "There's a map. Andrew made it, noting water sources, geological formations, places where the land speaks to those who know how to listen. And where's this map now?" "He kept it hidden, said it would be safe with the one thing Wells would never think to look for." Kate frowned. "That could be anywhere." "Not anywhere. Something specific, something personal." Caleb's eyes were intent on hers. "Think, Kate. What did Andrew value most in the world?" Before she could answer, Ruth called out from the window, "Riders coming!" Kate's heart leapt to her throat. She and Caleb moved to the window where Ruth stood. 3 men on horseback approached through the snow, but it wasn't Wells. At the lead rode Reverend Foster, his tall, thin figure unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him was Martha Sullivan, the oldest widow in the valley, wrapped in furs against the cold. The third rider, a young man Kate didn't recognize, brought up the rear. "Not Wells," Caleb murmured. "Not yet." They met their visitors outside, Kate calling the children to stay indoors. The Reverend dismounted stiffly, his old bones clearly protesting the cold ride. "Mrs. Hargrove," he nodded, "Mr. Thornton." If he disapproved of Caleb's continued presence, he kept it to himself. Martha Sullivan, a woman of 70 whose husband had been one of the valley's first settlers, remained seated on her horse. "We've come to check on you after the storm," she announced, and to bring news. What news? Kate asked, helping the Reverend to the porch where he could sit. Martha's wrinkled face was grave. Wells is gathering men, claims he has papers proving this land belongs to the mining company. She snorted. Papers that appeared mighty suddenly, if you ask me. The young man who had been securing the horses stepped forward. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of red hair beneath his hat, he had an open, honest face. Samuel Kearney, ma'am, he introduced himself with a respectful nod. I farm the North Ridge. Just wanted to let you know, whatever Wells is planning, you are not alone. Kate was momentarily speechless at this unexpected support. Thank you, Mr. Kearney. Inside the cabin, Martha warmed herself by the fire while the Reverend accepted a cup of coffee. The children, initially shy, were soon charmed by Martha's stories of the early days in the valley. Your husband was a good man, she told Kate. One of the few who stood up to Wells when he started buying up land for his mining interests. Her shrewd eyes moved to Caleb. You too, if memory serves. Caleb, leaning against the wall, merely nodded. What exactly is Wells claiming? Kate asked. The Reverend sighed. That Andrew signed over mineral rights to the company. That the agreement includes provisions for the company to take the land if necessary for mining operations. That's absurd, Kate protested. Andrew would never have signed such a thing. Of course not, Martha agreed. But Wells has Judge Patterson in his pocket, and the sheriff won't cross him. She lowered her voice, though the children were absorbed in Samuel's demonstration of a cat's cradle string game. There's talk he's bringing in men from outside. Rough sorts. Martha's weathered face softened slightly. You know, Wells wasn't always this way. Came here as a boy with his father during the big drought. Poor as church mice. After his pa died, he worked himself half to death in Jensen's mine. Never forgot how it felt to be powerless, I reckon. That doesn't excuse what he's doing now, Kate said firmly. No, Martha agreed. It doesn't. Sometimes the hardest hearts are the ones that were broken early. She straightened her shawl, but that's neither here nor there. What matters is protecting what's yours. Kate felt cold that had nothing to do with the winter day. When? Tomorrow, Samuel said, looking up from his string game. Maybe the next day. I've been keeping watch. And we've been praying, the Reverend added, though the Lord helps those who help themselves, as the saying goes. After their visitors departed, promising to return with supplies and news, Kate paced the cabin. We need to find that map. If Andrew really did discover something valuable, maybe we can use it as leverage. Caleb nodded slowly. We should check the grave. Kate stared at him. What? It's the last place Wells would look, and it would be like Andrew, keeping what he valued most near him. The thought was disturbing, but Kate couldn't deny the logic. We'll go tonight, after the children are asleep. As dusk approached, the temperature dropped further. Kate prepared a simple stew, watching the children at their play. Clara had insisted Caleb join her tea party, and the sight of the grizzled man sitting cross-legged beside her rag doll, pretending to sip from a tiny wooden cup he'd carved himself, squeezed Kate's heart in a way she hadn't felt in months. After dinner, as Caleb told stories by the fire, Kate noticed Timothy slipping away to his sleeping corner. He returned with something clutched in his hand, settling near Caleb with unusual hesitation. Mr. Thornton, he asked during a pause in the tale, did you really know my pa? Caleb nodded. I did. He was a fine man. Timothy opened his hand, revealing a pocket watch, Andrew's watch, which Kate thought had been lost in the mine collapse. He gave me this, before he didn't come home. His young voice trembled, said it would help me be the man of the house if anything happened. Kate's hand flew to her mouth. Andrew had known, had suspected the danger he was in, had prepared in his way for the worst. Caleb took the watch, turning it over in his hands with great care. This is a good watch, built to last. He returned it to Timothy, like the man who owned it. Did the bad men hurt him? Timothy asked, his face crumpling. Mr. Wells and his men. Caleb looked to Kate, a silent question in his eyes. How much truth could a child bear? Your father died in an accident, Kate said carefully. But Mr. Wells didn't do everything he could to prevent it. Timothy absorbed this, his young face struggling with adult concepts. Is that why Mr. Wells wants our land? Because Pa knew something bad about him. Something like that, Caleb confirmed. Your father was a brave man who stood up for what was right. Like you, Clara piped up unexpectedly from her place on the rug. The simple statement hung in the air. Caleb looked away, uncomfortable with the comparison. Time for bed, Kate said softly. It's been a long day. Later, after the children's breathing had deepened into sleep, Kate and Caleb prepared for their grim task. The night was clear and star-filled, the temperature well below freezing. They bundled in every layer they possessed, Kate tucking a small spade into her coat. I'll do it, Caleb said quietly as they approached the grave. You don't have to. Kate shook her head. He was my husband. If we're to disturb his rest, I should be the one. The frozen ground made digging nearly impossible. They took turns, breaking the soil inch by painful inch, their breath clouding in the moonlight. Kate's hands, despite her gloves, soon grew numb with cold. This feels wrong, she murmured, pausing to catch her breath. Even if it's necessary. Caleb, taking the spade from her, worked with grim determination. Andrew would understand. He'd want you to have what he left. The silence stretched between them as they worked, broken only by the scrape of metal on frozen earth and their labored breathing. Overhead, stars blazed in the clear winter sky, indifferent to the human struggle below. He proposed to me under stars like these, Kate said suddenly, said they reminded him of all the possibilities in life. She smiled at the memory. He was always looking up, looking ahead. Caleb paused in his digging. That sounds like Andrew. Always had a vision for what could be, not just what was. He talked about you sometimes, Kate admitted. His friend who'd seen the world, who knew about medicine and mining and a dozen other things. He exaggerated, Caleb said, resuming his work. I just wandered more than most. Until Lily and her mother, Kate said gently. Caleb's rhythm faltered. Until them. What was she like, your wife? For a moment, Kate thought he wouldn't answer her, then, softly, strong, stubborn, kind. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She could coax flowers to grow in the desert, seems like. Had a way of seeing beauty where others saw nothing. The tenderness in his voice stirred something in Kate. Recognition of a love that paralleled her own for Andrew. Different people, different circumstances, but the same depth of feeling. And Lily? Her mother's laugh, my curiosity. His voice caught. Would have been something to see her grow up. Kate touched his arm, a gesture of understanding that needed no words. They returned to their task, working now in a different kind of silence, one of shared grief, shared understanding. After what seemed hours, the spade struck something solid. Not a coffin. Andrew had been buried in a simple shroud, as was common in the frontier, but a small wooden box. Kate's heart pounded as Caleb lifted it from the earth. A plain pine box, sealed with wax against the elements. Together they refilled the grave as best they could, saying silent apologies to the man who lay there. Back in the cabin, with the children still sleeping soundly, they opened the box by firelight. Inside lay a packet wrapped in oilcloth. Kate's hands shook as she unwrapped it. Papers, a carefully drawn map showing the boundaries of their land, with X marks and notations in Andrew's neat hand. And beneath it, a letter addressed to her. My dearest Kate, it began. If you're reading this, then my fears were justified. I've discovered something that could change everything for us. But it's put us in danger. Wells suspects, but doesn't know for certain. The land holds not just gold, but something more valuable, a natural spring that feeds the entire valley. Control this water, and you control everything that grows or lives here. Wells means to dam it, divert it for his mining operations, leaving the rest to wither. I can't let that happen. I've marked the spring on the map. If anything happens to me, find Caleb Thornton. He's the only one I trust to help you protect what matters. Kate looked up, tears blurring her vision. Water, it was always about water. Caleb nodded grimly. Without water, the miners can't process ore. The farmers can't grow crops. The town dies. And Wells knows this spring is on our land? He suspects. That's why he wants to buy you out, or force you out. Caleb studied the map. Andrew mapped it perfectly. The spring originates here, beneath this ridge, and feeds underground into the creek system. Kate traced the map with her finger. All these farms, these homesteads, they all depend on this water, and none of them know it's in danger. Caleb's face hardened. Wells has been buying up land piece by piece. Once he controls the water, he controls everything. Kate felt the weight of the knowledge settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her family anymore. This was about an entire community. We need to tell them, she decided. Reverend Foster, Martha, Samuel, everyone who depends on this water. Caleb hesitated. Wells won't let this get out without a fight. Then we'll fight, Kate said simply. Andrew would have. They spread the map across the table, studying it in the lamplight. Andrew had been methodical, noting not just the main spring but all the underground channels, the places where the water surfaced briefly before diving back into the earth, the farms and homesteads that benefited from each branch. He must have spent months tracking this, Caleb said, admiration in his voice. Walking the land, observing. That's why he was so determined to keep this place, Kate realized. Not just for us, but for everyone in the valley. Caleb pointed to notations in the corner of the map. These are mineral deposits, gold most likely. Small veins, nothing like what Wells is claiming, but enough to sweeten the water rights. So Wells lied about the extent of the gold to justify taking our land. And to hide his real purpose, Caleb's finger traced the main spring. If he controls this, he controls the future of the entire region. Kate studied the map, thinking of the families who would suffer if Wells succeeded. How do we prove this? Will anyone believe us against Wells? The map is a start, but we need more. Caleb tapped the table thoughtfully. There must be official records of water rights at the county seat, and perhaps Andrew kept other documents. Like what? Correspondence with Wells, maybe. Anything that shows he knew about the water and was trying to protect it. Kate thought for a moment. There's the old trunk in the root cellar. Andrew kept important papers there. They spent the next hour going through the trunk, finding deeds, letters, notes from Andrew's prospecting trips. Among them, a letter from the territorial governor acknowledging receipt of Andrew's concerns about water rights in the valley. This could help, Caleb said, setting it aside. Shows Andrew was officially documenting his concerns. As they continued searching, Kate found a small notebook tucked in the lining of the trunk. Andrew's journal, filled with daily observations, sketches of the land, and increasingly worried notes about Wells's activities. Listen to this, she said, reading aloud. Wells brought surveyors to the ridge today. They weren't measuring for mining shafts, but for dam construction. When I questioned him, he claimed they were planning improvements to the town's water supply. A lie. The plans I glimpsed showed diversion to the mining camp, not the town. Caleb leaned closer. When was that entry? 3 weeks before the collapse. Kate turned the page. Met with Caleb today, shared my concerns. He agrees something's not right. We'll gather more evidence before taking action. She looked up at him. You knew. Caleb nodded heavily. We suspected. Didn't have enough proof yet. I was supposed to go to the territorial capital, find out who'd approved Wells' water rights claims. But then, the collapse happened. Kate finished his thought. She continued reading, her voice catching on the final entry, dated the day before Andrew died. Confronted Wells about the forged documents. He denied everything, but his eyes gave him away. Made it clear I won't be bought or frightened off. This land, this water, belongs to the valley, not to one man's greed. If anything happens to me, Kate will need protection. Caleb will come for them when he can. Kate closed the journal, tears threatening again. He knew the danger he was in, but not the extent of it. Caleb's voice was tight with old anger. Wells made that mining accident happen, I'm certain of it. I just can't prove it yet. They sat in silence, the weight of Andrew's final days heavy between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters Caleb had reinforced. We should sleep, Kate said finally. Tomorrow we'll need to decide how to use what we found. Caleb nodded but made no move to return to his bedroll. Instead, he stared into the dying fire, his face haunted by memories and regrets. It wasn't your fault, Kate said softly. Andrew made his own choices. I should have been there. And died alongside him? What good would that have done? Caleb looked up, meeting her gaze. At least I wouldn't have failed him. You haven't failed him. Kate reached across the table, her hand covering his. You're here now, helping his family, fighting for what he believed in. Something shifted in Caleb's eyes, a softening, a surrender to her logic. His hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both innocent and profound. Get some sleep, Kate, he said gently. Tomorrow will come soon enough. But sleep proved elusive for Kate. She lay awake thinking of Andrew's foresight, his courage in the face of Wells' threats, of the risk Caleb had taken coming here, knowing Wells would recognize him, would see him as a threat, of the strange new feeling stirring in her heart, not replacing her love for Andrew, but existing alongside it, like new growth beside established roots. Morning brought fresh snow and increased tension. Kate and Caleb agreed they needed to share their discoveries with those they could trust. Samuel Kearney volunteered to ride to neighboring homesteads, discreetly inviting key people to a meeting at Martha Sullivan's house in town that evening. Town's safer than here, Caleb explained to Kate as they prepared for the journey. Too exposed out here if Wells decides to move early. Timothy insisted on coming, unwilling to be separated from his mother or Caleb with danger looming. Kate relented, but decided Ruth and Clara would stay with Martha's granddaughter, away from the adult discussions. The ride to town was tense, every distant rider causing Kate's heart to race until they could confirm it wasn't one of Wells's men. Caleb rode beside her, vigilant, his rifle across his saddle. Timothy sat proud on his pony, trying to emulate Caleb's watchful demeanor. Martha's house stood at the edge of town, a sturdy two-story structure that had weathered decades of Montana winters. By dusk, a dozen people had gathered in her parlor, key landowners from the valley, the Reverend, and to Kate's surprise, the telegraph operator, a thin young man named Jenkins. Figured we might need to send messages, Samuel explained. Jenkins here isn't fond of Wells either. When all had assembled, Kate spread Andrew's map on Martha's dining table. This is what my husband discovered, she began. This is why Wells wants our land. The revelation of the spring's importance and Wells' plans to divert it caused an uproar. Farmers immediately understood what it would mean for their livelihoods. He'd kill the valley to feed his mines, Samuel said, voicing what everyone was thinking. But why keep it secret, asked Johnson, who owned the largest wheat farm. Water rights are registered publicly. Because once it's officially documented, it becomes harder to steal, Caleb explained. Wells has been operating in the shadows, buying land piece by piece, creating a monopoly without anyone connecting the dots. And my husband connected them, Kate added. That's why. She couldn't finish. That's why the accident at the mine, Reverend Foster said grimly. Lord, forgive me for thinking such things, but I've had my suspicions about that collapse. Jenkins, the telegraph operator, cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. Wells sent telegrams yesterday to Helena and Butte, requesting additional personnel for security operations. 15 men arriving tomorrow. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. He's bringing in hired guns, Samuel said finally. Means to take the land by force if necessary. We need to send for the marshal, Kate insisted. Show him the evidence. Marshal's 3 days ride away, Jenkins reminded her. Won't get here in time. Then we stand together, Martha declared, her aged voice strong with conviction. My Everett didn't help build this valley just to see it stolen by the likes of Ezra Wells. One by one, the others nodded, voiced their support. They would form a protective presence at Kate's cabin, a show of community solidarity that might give Wells pause. It's risky, Caleb warned. Wells won't back down easily. Could get ugly. Already is ugly, Johnson replied. Question is whether we let him destroy everything our families have built. Plans were made, watches organized. The men would take turns keeping guard at the cabin. Martha would care for Ruth and Claire in town until the danger passed. Jenkins would send telegrams to the marshal and the territorial governor, explaining the situation and requesting intervention. As the meeting concluded, Kate pulled Caleb aside. I should stay in town with the girls, she said, but I need to know you'll be careful out there. Caleb's eyes softened. I promised Andrew I'd protect you all. That hasn't changed. It's not just about the promise anymore, though, is it? Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, Samuel approached with last-minute arrangements, and the moment passed. But something had been acknowledged between them, something that would need addressing when the crisis was over. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Kate kissed her daughters goodbye, entrusting them to Martha's care. The old woman hugged her fiercely. "You come back for these little ones," she ordered. "Don't you dare let Wells win." With Timothy riding between them, Kate and Caleb returned to the cabin, accompanied by Samuel and Johnson. Other supporters would arrive throughout the day, creating a rotating presence that would signal to Wells that Kate was not alone. They were preparing the cabin, securing windows, positioning men at strategic points, when Ruth's prediction came true. Riders appeared on the horizon, a large group moving with purpose. "Wells," Samuel confirmed, lowering his spyglass, "and he's brought his army." Caleb positioned himself on the porch, rifle held casually but visibly. Kate stood beside him, Andrew's map and journal tucked safely in her pocket. Timothy, despite their objections, planted himself between them, refusing to be sent inside. "Just like his father," Caleb murmured. "Stubborn as both his parents," Kate corrected, a hint of pride in her voice. Wells rode at the front of his group, 15 men behind him, just as Jenkins had warned. They halted a respectful distance from the cabin, assessing the defenders visible at windows and around the property. "Mrs. Hargrove," Wells called, his voice carrying in the cold air. "I see you've gathered friends, unnecessary and unwise." "We're here representing the valley's interest," Kate replied. "Interests you're threatening with your plans for our water." A flicker of surprise crossed Wells's face, quickly masked. "This is about mineral rights, as you well know." "This is about the spring that feeds the entire valley," Kate countered, pulling the map from her pocket and holding it up. "The spring my husband documented. The one you plan to dam and divert, leaving our farms to wither." Murmurs ran through the men behind Wells. Not all of them, Kate realized, understood the full implications of their employer's plans. "Lies," Wells snapped. "Desperate fabrications to avoid the legal transfer of land rightfully contracted to the mining company." "Then you won't mind if we show this map to the territorial governor," Caleb spoke up, "along with Andrew's journal documenting your threats, and the letter acknowledging his concerns about water rights being stolen." Wells' face darkened. "Thornton, I should have dealt with you years ago along with your interfering friend." The naked admission of guilt silenced the gathering. Even some of Wells' men exchanged uncomfortable glances. "You hear that?" Samuel called to the assembled men. "He just admitted to killing Andrew Hargrove." "I admitted nothing," Wells snarled, "and this charade has gone on long enough." He gestured to his men. "Remove these trespassers and secure the property." No one moved. The hired guns looked uncertain, realizing they were outnumbered by determined locals protecting their livelihoods. "You're asking these men to risk their lives for a water grab," Caleb said, addressing Wells' men directly, "to help one man steal what an entire community needs to survive." "They're being paid to do a job," Wells snapped, "a legal job, enforcing the mining company's rightful claim." "A claim based on forged documents," Kate countered. "Documents that appeared only after my husband's death." From behind the cabin, more riders appeared. Additional farmers and townspeople, alerted by Samuel's network. Wells was now significantly outnumbered, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he warned, turning his horse. "The law will back me." "Perhaps," Reverend Foster spoke up from where he sat on the porch. "But will your investors, when they learn their money is being used for water theft rather than gold mining? When they face the legal challenges that will surely come?" Uncertainty flickered across Wells' face, the first genuine crack in his confidence. "1 week," he said abruptly. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, I cannot be responsible for the consequences." He jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Let's go." As Wells and his men retreated, a cheer went up from the defenders. They'd won the first confrontation, but everyone knew the fight was far from over. Inside the cabin, as neighbors crowded around the table to examine the map more closely, Reverend Foster drew Caleb aside. "Wells won't give up," he warned, "and he has friends in high places." Caleb nodded grimly. "I know, but so did Andrew. There are telegrams, records of his concerns, evidence I've been gathering." "You came prepared for this fight," the Reverend observed. "I promised a dying man I'd protect his family." Caleb's eyes found Kate across the room, surrounded by supporters, her face animated as she explained the map's details. "I intend to keep that promise." The impromptu gathering lasted well into the afternoon. Plans were made, strategies discussed. The homesteaders would take turns keeping watch on the cabin. Samuel Kearney offered space in his root cellar for the children if trouble came. Martha insisted Kate and Timothy visit her in town regularly, showing the community they weren't intimidated. As the last visitors departed, Kate stood on the porch, waving until they disappeared over the ridge. The short winter day was already fading, the temperature dropping with the sun. "You did well today," Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. "We did," Kate corrected. "I couldn't have faced them alone." Inside, Timothy was unusually quiet, processing the day's events. He sat at the table, turning his father's watch over in his hands. "You thinking about your pa?" Kate asked, sitting beside him. Timothy nodded. "Do you think he'd be proud of what we did today?" "I know he would," Kate smoothed his hair. "Standing up for what's right, protecting our land, helping our neighbors. Those were all things your father believed in." "I was scared," Timothy admitted in a small voice, "but I didn't run." "Being brave isn't about not feeling scared," Caleb said, joining them at the table. "It's about doing what needs doing even when you are scared." "Is that what my pa did? In the mine?" Kate and Caleb exchanged glances. "Yes," Caleb answered. "Your father faced something frightening because he believed it was important. That's the bravest kind of courage there is." Timothy considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I want to be brave like that." "You already are," Kate assured him, hugging him close. "Now time for bed. Tomorrow will be another long day." After Timothy was asleep, Kate and Caleb sat by the fire, planning their next steps. They would need legal help, a lawyer not in Wells's pocket. They would need to document everything, gather statements from neighbors who'd witnessed Wells's threats. "There's a circuit judge coming through the county seat next month," Caleb said. "Honest man, from what I hear. If we can hold Wells off until then." "A month is a long time," Kate observed, "especially with winter setting in." Caleb nodded. "We'll need to be vigilant. Wells might try something under cover of another storm." Kate stared into the fire, thinking of all that had transpired in the short time since Caleb had arrived. From a half-built cabin to a stand against the most powerful man in the valley. From isolation to community support. From despair to hope. "Why did you really wait so long?" she asked suddenly. 15 months is a long time to fulfill a promise to a dying friend. Caleb was silent for so long that Kate thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. "I was injured badly in the collapse. Took months to recover, and then," he looked away, "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. The man who survived when Andrew didn't. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I should have been there. Should have seen the signs of tampering with the supports." Kate moved to sit beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him. "Andrew made his own choices, as did you." Caleb met her eyes, his own filled with a pain that mirrored hers. "I watched my wife and daughter die of a fever I couldn't cure. Then I watched my best friend die in a mine collapse I couldn't prevent. I began to think maybe I was the common factor, that people around me were cursed to suffer." "That's not true," Kate said firmly. "Isn't it? Look at what's happening now. Wells threatening your family because I'm here. Wells is threatening us because of what Andrew discovered. You being here is the only reason we've survived this long." Caleb shook his head. "You're strong, Kate, stronger than you know. You'd have found a way." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I'm glad I didn't have to." On impulse, she reached for his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against hers. "We're stronger together, Caleb. That's what today proved." Something shifted in his eyes, not just understanding, but a quiet resolve. His hand turned in hers, steady and certain. "Get some rest, Kate," he said, rising from his chair. "Tomorrow we face Wells and his men. We'll need our strength." But as he moved toward his bedroll by the door, Kate caught his wrist. "Caleb?" When he turned, she met his gaze directly. "Thank you. Not just for staying, but for seeing us. All of us." The cabin creaked in the rising wind, snow pattering against the windows like gentle fingertips. Caleb nodded once, the firelight catching the silver at his temples. The lines of his face softened in the shadows. "Sleep well," he said, and there was a promise in those simple words that needed no elaboration. From her corner, unnoticed by either adult, Ruth watched with solemn eyes, her small hand busily drawing what she saw. Two people standing at the edge of something important, something neither was yet ready to name. Morning broke over the Montana Valley with light that splintered through ice crystals, casting rainbows across the snow. Kate stood at the cabin window, watching the prismatic display with a quiet wonder that momentarily pushed aside her worries. A week had passed since the confrontation with Wells, a week of tense vigilance, of neighbors keeping watch, of planning and preparing for whatever would come next. Pretty, isn't it? Caleb's voice came from behind her. He'd risen early as always, already stoked the fire and put coffee on to boil. Like diamonds scattered across the snow, Kate agreed. She accepted the steaming cup he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Such small moments of contact had become more frequent between them, each one a wordless acknowledgement of the bond that was forming. No sign of Wells yesterday, Caleb noted, joining her at the window. Makes me uneasy. You think he's planning something? Man like that doesn't just give up, especially not when he's got as much at stake as Wells does. Kate sipped her coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. The marshal should arrive today. Samuel's message said he was already on his way from Helena. If he makes it through the passes, there's more snow coming. As if confirming his words, the bright morning light began to dim. Clouds gathered on the northern horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of another storm. Kate felt the familiar clench of worry in her stomach. Winter storms could isolate them for days, cut them off from help if Wells chose to strike. Timothy emerged from the sleeping alcove, rubbing his eyes. At 8, he carried himself with a new seriousness since the confrontation with Wells. He'd appointed himself Caleb's deputy, following him around the property as they checked fence lines and reinforced outbuildings. Can we go to town today, Ma, to see Ruth and Clara? Kate hesitated. The road to town would be treacherous once the storm hit, but she missed her daughters fiercely. Martha Sullivan had sent word daily that the girls were safe and happy, but it wasn't the same as holding them. We should go soon, if we're going, Caleb said, reading her thoughts. Get there before the snow starts. Stay overnight if needed. Kate nodded, decision made. I'll pack some things. Timothy, get dressed warmly. An hour later, they were on the trail to town, bundled against the cold, Caleb leading the way on his bay gelding. The sky continued to darken, the wind picking up, driving icy particles against their faces. Kate pulled her scarf higher, eyes narrowed against the sting. Should have left earlier, Caleb called back, voice nearly lost in the wind. Storm's coming faster than I thought. They pressed on, the horses laboring through deepening snow. Timothy rode between them, his small figure hunched against the cold, but sitting straight in the saddle, determined not to complain. They were halfway to town when Caleb suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Kate reined in beside him, following his gaze to the ridge above the trail. Riders, 3 of them, silhouetted against the leaden sky. Wells' men? She whispered, fear clutching at her throat. Caleb shook his head slightly. Can't tell, but they were watching the trail. Have been for a while, I'd guess. Timothy's hand slipped toward the small knife Caleb had given him, more a tool than a weapon, but the boy found comfort in it. What do we do? We keep riding, Caleb decided. Steady pace, no sudden moves. They might just be travelers waiting out the weather. But he didn't believe that, Kate could tell. His posture had changed, shoulders tense, hand resting near his sidearm. They continued down the trail, the riders on the ridge paralleling their course, maintaining distance but clearly tracking them. If anything happens, Caleb said quietly, you take Timothy and ride hard for town. Don't look back. I won't leave you, Kate protested. You'll do what needs doing, Caleb countered, his tone brooking no argument. Those children need their mother. The trail narrowed as it descended into a small ravine, snow-laden pines crowding close on either side. A perfect spot for an ambush, Kate realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Caleb evidently thought the same, for he urged his horse forward, taking the lead through the narrow passage. They were halfway through when the shot rang out. The report echoed through the ravine, startling birds from the trees in an explosion of snow and wings. Caleb's horse reared, nearly unseating him, as splinters flew from a tree trunk inches from his head. Ride, he shouted, drawing his pistol. Now, Kate seized Timothy's reins, dragging his horse alongside hers as she kicked her mount into a gallop. Behind them, 2 more shots cracked through the frozen air. She resisted the overwhelming urge to look back, focusing instead on the trail ahead, on keeping Timothy close, on the pounding rhythm of hooves on packed snow. The sounds of pursuit followed, shouting men, the thunder of galloping horses. Then another shot, different somehow, Caleb returning fire, a cry of pain. The pursuit faltered momentarily. The trail widened as they burst from the ravine onto more open ground. Town lay just beyond the next rise, close enough to raise hope. Kate risked a glance back. Caleb was still in the saddle, hunched low over his horse's neck, but keeping pace. Behind him, only two riders remained in pursuit, one clutching his arm. The third was nowhere to be seen. "Almost there," she called to Timothy, whose face was white with fear, but set in determination. "Just over the hill." They crested the rise, the buildings of Bitter Creek appearing below, smoke rising from chimneys into the darkening sky. Kate opened her mouth to cry for help, but the words died in her throat as she saw what awaited them. Ezra Wells stood in the center of the main street, flanked by at least 10 men, blocking their path to safety. They skidded to a halt, horses blowing hard, steam rising from heaving flanks. Caleb pulled up beside them, blood seeping through his coat sleeve, but a gun steady in his hand. "Quite a reception, Wells," he said, voice deceptively calm. "Didn't expect you to roll out the welcome so personally." Wells stepped forward, a satisfied smile spreading across his fleshy face. "Thornton, Mrs. Hargrove, how fortunate. I was just about to send men to escort you into town." His eyes slid to Timothy, and young Master Hargrove, too. Now the family can be reunited. Kate's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean? Where are my daughters?" "Safe," Wells assured her, his tone mockingly solicitous. "For now, at my home, enjoying the hospitality that their mother has so consistently refused." "You're lying," Timothy burst out. "Aunt Martha wouldn't let you take them." A shadow crossed Wells's face. "Mrs. Sullivan has been indisposed since yesterday evening. Most unfortunate, her age considered." "What have you done to her?" Kate demanded, rage overcoming fear. "Nothing permanent. She simply needed to rest after her disagreement with my men." Wells gestured expansively. "Now shall we dispense with this unpleasantness? You have something I want, Mrs. Hargrove. I have something you want. A simple exchange." "The map," Caleb said flatly, "and the water rights." "Precisely. Sign the deed transfer I've prepared. Hand over all copies of that troublesome map and any other documents your husband may have hidden, and your daughters will be returned unharmed." Kate felt the world tilting beneath her. Ruth and Clara in that man's hands. Martha hurt or worse. Every instinct screamed at her to agree, to do anything to get her children back. But another voice, one that sounded remarkably like Andrew's, cautioned patience. "How do I know they're safe?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Wells snapped his fingers, and one of his men produced a small object. Clara's wooden horse, the one Caleb had carved. Kate heard Caleb's sharp intake of breath beside her. "Proof of life, as they say." Wells smiled. "They're quite well, I assure you. The little one has been asking for her horse." "Touching, really." "Let us see them first," Kate insisted. "Then we'll discuss terms." Wells considered her, eyes calculating. "Very well. A brief visit, supervised, of course. Then we conclude our business." He turned to his men. "Escort Mrs. Hargrove and her son to my house. Thornton stays here." "No," Kate and Caleb said simultaneously. "That wasn't a request," Wells replied, his men moving to surround them. "Thornton has proven himself unpredictable. He'll remain here under guard until our transaction is complete." Kate looked at Caleb, panic rising. They couldn't be separated, not now, not with everything at stake. "It's all right," Caleb said quietly, eyes holding hers. "Go see the girls. Make sure they're safe." His gaze flicked meaningfully toward his saddlebag, where she knew the map and Andrew's journal were stored. "I'll be waiting." The subtext was clear. Don't give Wells anything until they had a plan. Kate nodded slightly, understanding passing between them. "Fine," she told Wells. "Take us to my daughters." Two of Wells' men flanked Kate and Timothy as they rode toward the large house at the edge of town. Wells' residence, a two-story structure that dwarfed the modest dwellings surrounding it. The storm clouds had reached them, first flakes beginning to drift down, the wind picking up force. Wells himself led the way, smug satisfaction radiating from every pore. Behind them, Caleb remained in the center of town, surrounded by armed men, but sitting tall in his saddle, watching them go with an expression Kate couldn't read. The house was warm, ostentatiously furnished with imported carpets and heavy furniture that seemed out of place in the frontier town. A servant took their coats, eyeing them warily. "The children are upstairs," Wells informed her. "You have 10 minutes." Kate clutched Timothy's hand as they were led upstairs, every sense alert for signs of danger or opportunity. The upper floor held several bedrooms, one door flanked by yet another of Wells's hired guns. "Ma!" Ruth's cry came the moment the door opened. Both girls launched themselves at Kate, nearly knocking her over with the force of their embrace. She fell to her knees, gathering them close, breathing in their familiar scent, checking frantically for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" she demanded, pulling back to examine their faces. Clara shook her head, her 4-year-old face solemn. "The mean lady yelled at Aunt Martha. She fell down." Kate's heart contracted. "What mean lady?" "Mrs. Wells," Ruth supplied, her voice low. "She hit Aunt Martha with a vase when she wouldn't let them take us. There was blood." "Where is Aunt Martha now?" Kate asked, struggling to keep her voice calm for the children's sake. Ruth shook her head. "They took her away, said she needed a doctor." Timothy had been examining the room, a guest bedroom, sparsely furnished but comfortable enough. "The window's nailed shut," he reported. "I already checked." Kate squeezed his shoulder, proud of his presence of mind. "Are they feeding you? Treating you well otherwise?" Both girls nodded. "The cook is nice," Clara offered. "She gave us cookies, but I want to go home." "We will," Kate promised, drawing them close again. "Very soon." Her mind raced, assessing options. Wells had been smart to separate her from Caleb, to use the children as leverage, but he'd miscalculated in allowing this visit. Now she knew the girls were truly here, unharmed, and could plan accordingly. "Listen to me," she whispered, gathering all 3 children into a tight circle. "Mr. Thornton and I are going to get you out of here, but you need to be brave and patient a little longer. Can you do that?" 3 solemn nods answered her. "Timothy, you'll stay with your sisters. Watch over them. If anyone tries to separate you, raise the biggest fuss you can." "Yes, Ma," he whispered back, slipping something from his pocket. Caleb's small knife, somehow concealed from their captors. "Mr. Thornton showed me how to hide it." Kate smiled despite the dire situation. Caleb had been preparing for trouble, even teaching Timothy precautions. "Good boy. Keep it hidden unless you absolutely need it." A sharp knock interrupted them. "Time's up," Wells' voice called through the door. Kate hugged each child once more, whispering reassurances before rising to face Wells as he entered. "Satisfied they're unharmed?" he asked, as if he'd done her a great favor. "What have you done with Martha Sullivan?" Kate demanded. Wells waved a dismissive hand. "The doctor is attending her. A minor concussion, nothing more. Now, shall we discuss our transaction?" "Not here," Kate replied, casting a meaningful glance at the children. "And not without Caleb Thornton present." Wells' expression hardened. "You're not in a position to make demands, Mrs. Hargrove." "Neither are you," she countered. "The map and documents aren't here. They're hidden where only Thornton and I can find them. If anything happens to any of us, they go straight to the territorial governor, along with sworn statements from half the valley about your threats and illegal activities." It was a bluff, but one rooted in enough truth to be credible. Wells studied her, reassessing. "Very well," he conceded finally. "We'll convene at my office. Thornton may join us, under guard, of course." "The children stay together under my sight at all times," Kate added. Wells nodded grudgingly. "As you wish. Though I warn you, Mrs. Hargrove, my patience is not limitless." As they prepared to leave, Kate noticed one of Wells' men, a quiet, dark-haired fellow, watching her with an expression different from the others. When Wells turned to give orders, the man moved closer. "Name's Cooper," he whispered without looking at her directly. "Got a daughter Clara's age myself, never signed up for threatening children. I'll help if I can." Before Kate could respond, he stepped away, face once again impassive. But a seed of hope had been planted. Not everyone in Wells' employ lacked conscience. The storm had intensified during their brief stay. Snow now falling heavily, the wind driving it into blinding sheets. They made their way back to town, Kate and the children in Wells' enclosed carriage, armed men riding alongside. Through the frosted windows, Kate glimpsed townspeople hurrying about last-minute errands before the storm trapped them indoors, most avoiding looking directly at the procession. Wells' office occupied the ground floor of the town's only brick building, adjacent to the bank he controlled. Inside, Caleb waited, standing despite his injured arm, tension evident in every line of his body. His face revealed nothing when they entered, but his eyes went immediately to the children, checking them as Kate had done. "Tearful reunion accomplished," Wells announced, removing his snow-dusted coat. "Now to business." Kate settled the children on a bench against the wall, positioning herself between them and Wells. Caleb moved to stand beside her, a united front. "You seem to believe you hold all the cards, Wells," Caleb said. "You don't." Wells seated himself behind his imposing desk. "I have control of this town. I have men watching every road. A storm is coming that will trap us all for days. And most importantly, I have the means to ensure Mrs. Hargrove's cooperation." He smiled thinly. "What cards do you hold exactly?" "The truth," Kate answered, "about the spring, about what really happened to my husband, about your plans to steal the water that feeds this entire valley." "Truth," Wells scoffed. "A malleable concept, especially here in the territories. What matters is power, Mrs. Hargrove. The power to shape events, to determine outcomes." He leaned forward. "I've invested too much to allow your sentimentality about a piece of land to interfere with progress." "You call destroying the livelihoods of dozens of families progress?" Caleb challenged. "I call it business," Wells replied coldly. "Mining requires water. The mines bring funds, commerce, development. A few farms are insignificant against the wealth that will flow through this valley." "Those few farms feed the region," Kate said. "Without them, your miners starve." Wells waved away the objection. "Food can be imported. Water cannot." He extracted papers from his desk drawer. "Now the deed transfer. Sign it, Mrs. Hargrove, and this unfortunate situation resolves itself immediately." Kate made no move to take the offered pen. "And if I refuse? Then we wait out the storm together. How comfortable that wait proves for your children is entirely dependent on your cooperation." The naked threat hung in the air. Outside, the storm's howl intensified, rattling the windows. "You think you've won," Caleb said quietly. "That's always been your weakness, Wells, underestimating others." Wells' eyes narrowed. "And yours has been misplaced loyalty, Thornton. First to Hargrove, now to his widow. It's pathetic, really." A commotion outside interrupted the tense exchange, shouting voices, the sounds of horses arriving. Wells frowned, moving to the window. "What now?" he muttered, peering through the snow-streaked glass. The office door burst open, admitting a flurry of snow and a tall figure in a snow-crusted coat. The federal marshal, Roland Hayes, stomped his boots on the threshold, ice crystals clinging to his mustache and eyebrows. Behind him stood Cooper, the dark-haired man from Wells' crew, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "This man rode 15 miles through the storm to find me," Hayes said, nodding toward Cooper. "Seems he had a change of heart about his employer's methods, particularly when it comes to threatening children." Wells' face contorted with rage. "You treacherous—" "That's enough," Hayes cut him off. "Mr. Cooper here has provided quite the detailed account of your recent activities, including plans that weren't exactly above board. Quite a welcome, Wells," he growled, surveying the room, taking in the armed men, Kate and Caleb's tense postures, the wide-eyed children. "Though not the one I expected when I rode all this way through a blizzard." Wells recovered quickly, smoothing his expression into one of cordial welcome. "Marshal Hayes, what an unexpected pleasure. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow at the earliest." "Evidently," Hayes replied dryly. "Seems I've interrupted something. Care to explain why Mrs. Hargrove and her children appear to be here under duress?" "A simple business meeting," Wells assured him. "Perhaps grown a bit tense, but nothing requiring federal intervention." Hayes turned to Kate. "That your understanding of the situation, ma'am?" "He's holding my daughters hostage to force me to sign over my land," Kate said bluntly, "and he's injured Martha Sullivan, who was caring for them." Hayes' expression hardened. "That true, Wells?" "Ridiculous allegations," Wells blustered. "The children are here as guests. Mrs. Sullivan had an unfortunate fall. Ask my wife if you don't believe me." "I intend to." Hayes unbuttoned his coat, revealing the badge pinned to his chest and More significantly, the holstered sidearm. But first, I think we'll all adjourn to the sheriff's office. Sort this out properly. One of Wells' men shifted, hand moving toward his gun. Hayes fixed him with a look of such cold authority that the man froze. I wouldn't, the marshal advised quietly. Not unless you are willing to hang for it. The standoff held for one tense moment. Then Wells raised a hand, signaling his men to stand down. This is a local matter, Marshal, he insisted. A simple property dispute blown out of proportion by Mrs. Hargrove's emotional state. Hayes ignored him, addressing Kate again. Got word from the telegraph operator before the lines went down. Something about water rights and threats. Might need to see that map, he mentioned. Kate stared at the marshal, hope flaring. Jenkins had gotten through to the authorities after all, despite Wells's control of the town. I have it, she confirmed, along with my husband's journal documenting Wells's threats before the mine collapse that killed him. Wells's face darkened with fury. Slander! Unsupported accusations from a distraught widow. We'll let a judge sort it out, Hayes replied implacably. For now, you're coming with me, Wells. We've got statements to take, evidence to review. You're exceeding your authority, Wells snarled. I am a respected businessman with connections in the territorial capital. This persecution will not stand. Hayes seemed unimpressed. Save it for the judge. He nodded to Kate and Caleb. Gather the children. You'll all stay at the sheriff's office until we determine it's safe. Outside, the blizzard had transformed the town into a white wasteland, visibility reduced to mere yards. Hayes had not come alone. 4 deputy marshals accompanied him, grim-faced men who efficiently disarmed Wells's hired guns and escorted their employer through the driving snow. The sheriff's office, a solid stone building near the town center, provided sanctuary from both storm and threat. Inside, a roaring fire and coffee awaited, along with an unexpected ally. Martha Sullivan, her head bandaged but her spirit unbowed. Martha, Kate exclaimed, rushing to embrace the older woman. Ruth said you were hurt. Takes more than a vase to the head to keep me down, Martha declared, though her pallor suggested the injury had been serious. That awful woman thought I'd sit quiet while she took the children. Ha! Dr. Peterson, the town's elderly physician, stood nearby, gathering his medical bag. Mrs. Sullivan has a concussion and needed 12 stitches, he explained, his face grave. If Samuel Kearney hadn't heard the commotion and come running, it could have been much worse. Eliza Wells has always had a temper, Martha added, wincing as she adjusted her position. But I never thought she'd resort to violence. When those men came for the children, I stood in the doorway and refused to move. A flicker of pride crossed her weathered face. Told them they'd have to go through me first. And they did, Dr. Peterson said grimly. Half the town heard her screams. By the time people reached her house, Wells' men had taken the children and left Martha bleeding on the floor. Kate noticed now the crowd of townspeople gathered outside the sheriff's windows, their faces a mixture of concern and outrage. Bitter Creek might bow to Wells' economic power, but attacking a respected widow of 70, one whose husband had helped found the town, had crossed a line that money couldn't erase. Reverend Foster placed a gentle hand on Martha's shoulder. The town stands with you, Martha. What the Wells family did today has opened many eyes. The children swarmed Martha, Clara climbing carefully onto the bench beside her, mindful of her injuries in a way that spoke of the old woman's importance to them. You were very brave, Timothy told her solemnly. Martha's eyes misted. Not brave enough to stop them taking you, I'm afraid. Brave enough to show the town Wells' true nature, Hayes observed. Sometimes that's the more important battle. While the children settled with Martha, Hayes drew Kate and Caleb aside. Jenkins got a message through before the storm took down the lines, he explained. Not much detail, but enough to get my attention. Said Wells was threatening violence over water rights documented by your late husband. Kate nodded, retrieving Andrew's map and journal from Caleb's saddlebag. My husband discovered that the spring on our land feeds the entire valley. Wells wants to dam it for his mining operations, which would devastate every farm and homestead for miles. Hayes examined the map, his weathered face grave. Seen water disputes turn ugly before. Men have died for less than this. One already has, Caleb said quietly. The marshal looked up sharply. You're suggesting the mine collapse wasn't an accident. Andrew confronted Wells about forged documents the day before it happened, Kate explained. It's in his journal, the last entry. Hayes read the relevant passages, his expression darkening. Not enough for a murder charge, but enough to warrant investigation. He studied them both. You've taken a significant risk standing up to him. We had help, Caleb acknowledged. The community rallied once they understood what was at stake. Community's important out here, Hayes agreed. More important than gold, in my experience. He carefully refolded the map. I'll need to take statements from everyone involved. Formal documentation of Wells's threats, the incident with Mrs. Sullivan, his holding of the children. Once the storm clears, we'll get it all before the circuit judge. And until then? Kate asked, glancing toward the window where snow continued to fall with undiminished intensity. Until then, we wait, Hayes said simply. Wells and his men will be confined to the jail cells. You and the children can stay here or return to your cabin if you prefer. The decision was simple. We'll stay in town, Kate declared, close to help if needed. Martha insisted they use her home, which despite the unpleasant memories of the children's abduction, offered more comfort than the sheriff's office. Hayes assigned one of his deputies to accompany them, a precaution that seemed wise given Wells' connections in town. The storm raged through the night, transforming Bitter Creek into a snowbound island cut off from the outside world. By morning, drifts reached the eaves of some buildings, roads were impassable, and the town settled into the enforced intimacy that winter storms brought to frontier communities. Kate woke early, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back. The ambush, the confrontation, the marshal's timely arrival. She rose quietly, leaving the children still sleeping, and made her way downstairs. Caleb sat at Martha's kitchen table, arm properly bandaged now, coffee steaming before him. He looked up as she entered, his face softening. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she admitted, pouring herself coffee from the pot on the stove. "Knowing the children are safe makes all the difference. Hayes has men watching the jail. Wells isn't going anywhere." Kate settled across from him, warming her hands on the mug. "What happens when the storm clears? Wells has connections, money. Will it be enough?" Caleb considered this. Hayes seems like a straight shooter, and with Andrew's documents, the community's statements, and Wells's own actions yesterday, there's a strong case against him. But not a guarantee. "Nothing's guaranteed out here," Caleb acknowledged. "But we've done what Andrew would have wanted, protected the land, the water, the community he cared about." Kate studied him over the rim of her cup. "And after, when this is resolved one way or another? What then?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Caleb's eyes met hers, serious and searching. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether there's a place for me here. Not just as Andrew's friend fulfilling a promise, but as—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "As yourself," Kate finished for him. "As Caleb Thornton, not just the man who came to help." He nodded, something vulnerable crossing his face. "I've been running for a long time, Kate. From what happened to Lily and her mother. From failing Andrew. But being here with you and the children." He looked down at his scarred hands. "Makes me think maybe it's time to stop running." Kate reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "There's always been a place for you here, Caleb. Even before I knew who you were, I think part of me recognized something. Familiar. Because of Andrew? At first, perhaps, but now—" She searched for words to express the complex emotions that had developed. "Now it's because of you. The way you are with the children. The man I've come to know." Caleb turned his hand, capturing hers. "I'm not trying to replace him." "I know that," Kate assured him. "Andrew will always be part of us. But that doesn't mean there can't be something new, something different, but equally valuable." A sound from the doorway interrupted them. Timothy, watching with solemn eyes. Kate started to withdraw her hand, but Caleb held firm, meeting the boy's gaze openly. "Morning, Tim," he said quietly. "Coffee's hot if you want some." Timothy looked between them, processing what he'd seen and heard. Kate held her breath, uncertain how her eldest would react to this visible sign of her growing feelings for Caleb. "Pa would want us to be happy," Timothy said finally, with a wisdom beyond his years. "He told me that once. Said if anything happened to him, he wanted us to find happiness again." Kate felt tears spring to her eyes. "He said that to you?" Timothy nodded. When he gave me his watch, said being happy wasn't being disloyal. It was honoring what he'd tried to build for us. He approached the table, standing tall. I think Mr. Thornton helps us be happy again. Caleb's hand tightened around Kate's, emotion raw on his face. I'll do my best to deserve that trust, Timothy. The boy nodded gravely, accepting this pledge. I know. That's why I gave you Pa's half of the coin. Kate gasped. You what? Timothy shrugged, suddenly looking his age again. Found it in Pa's things after. Figured Mr. Thornton should have it back, since he came to help us like Pa wanted. Kate looked at Caleb, who appeared equally stunned by this revelation. When did you do this? Night of the blizzard, Timothy admitted, slipping it into his coat pocket while he was telling Clara a story. Caleb reached into his pocket with his free hand, extracting the silver half coin, the match to the one Kate wore around her neck. I thought, he shook his head, I thought it was a sign, from Andrew somehow. Maybe it was, Kate said softly. Through Timothy. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Ruth and Clara, sleepy-eyed but excited to find themselves in Martha's house with snow piled high outside the windows. The conversation shifted to breakfast and plans for the day, but the connection established remained, a silent understanding between them all. The storm continued through that day and the next, howling around eaves and piling snow ever higher. Bitter Creek settled into the rhythm of a community weathering winter's fury, neighbors checking on neighbors, supplies shared, stories exchanged around fires that never died down. Hayes maintained his vigilance at the jail, but Wells remained secure, his men either confined with him or departed, unwilling to risk further association with his schemes. The forced inactivity of the storm provided time for reflection, for healing, for the cementing of bonds that had formed under pressure. On the third day, the storm finally broke, revealing a transformed landscape glittering under a brilliant blue sky. The temperature remained well below freezing, but the sun's return lifted spirits throughout the snowbound town. Roads should be passable by tomorrow, Hayes announced, stomping snow from his boots as he entered Martha's kitchen, where they'd gathered for breakfast. I've sent word ahead to Judge Hollister. He's adjusting his circuit to hear this case first when he arrives in 3 days. Kate exchanged glances with Caleb. What about Wells? Will he stay in custody until then? He will, Hayes confirmed. His complaints about false imprisonment fell on deaf ears once I read your husband's journal and took Mrs. Sullivan's statement about the assault and abduction. And after the hearing, Caleb asked, if the judge rules against him? Hayes stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Wells will face multiple charges, assault, kidnapping, possibly conspiracy if we can prove the mine sabotage. Even with his connections, he's looking at serious consequences. And the water rights? Kate pressed. The spring? Based on the documentation you have provided, the judge is likely to formalize protection of the water source for the community's benefit. Might even establish a local water board to manage it. Hayes smiled slightly. Your husband was forward-thinking, Mrs. Hargrove. His maps and notes provide exactly the kind of evidence needed to protect that resource. Relief washed through Kate. Andrew's work, his sacrifice, would not be in vain. The valley he loved would be protected. What about the children? Martha interjected from her seat by the fire. After everything they've been through, testifying in court could be difficult. Hayes nodded understanding. I'll do my best to shield them from the worst of it. Their statements about being held against their will are already recorded. Judge Hollister is a fair man, known for his consideration toward young witnesses. As the marshal departed, Kate found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered town. Bitter Creek looked almost picturesque now, smoke rising from chimneys, a few brave souls beginning to dig paths between buildings. Penny for your thoughts, Caleb said, joining her. I was thinking about beginnings and endings, she replied, how they're often the same thing viewed from different perspectives. Caleb's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally now. And which is this, beginning or ending? Kate turned to face him, taking in the man who had arrived as a stranger and become so much more. Both, I think, the end of Wells's threats, the end of being alone against the world. Her voice softened, the beginning of something new, something built on choice rather than circumstance. Caleb's eyes, usually so guarded, held a warmth that made her heart quicken. I'd like that, he said simply, to build something with you, if you'll have me. Before Kate could respond, Clara came bounding over, wooden horse clutched in her hand. Mr. Thorne, come see the snow castle. I made it with Ruth in the window box. Caleb laughed, swinging the child up into his arms with his good side. A snow castle, is it? Must be fit for a princess, then. I'm the queen, Clara corrected seriously. Ruth is the princess. Timothy is the knight. And what am I in this royal household? Caleb asked, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. Clara considered this with four-year-old solemnity. You're the king, she decided, because you take care of us like Pa did. Kate saw Caleb's throat work as he swallowed emotion. That's a big responsibility, little one. You can do it, Clara assured him with complete confidence. Ma will help you. Over the child's head, their eyes met, Caleb's questioning, Kate's affirming. A silent exchange that held more meaning than words could express. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation for Judge Hollister's arrival. Roads were cleared, statements finalized, the community mobilized to ensure their case would be presented comprehensively. Wells remained in custody, his bluster gradually giving way to the realization that his power had limits. On the morning the judge was due, Kate stood before the mirror in Martha's guest room, pinning her hair with unusual care. Her best dress, preserved from her teaching days in the East, had been pressed and aired. She wanted to present herself not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a strong woman defending her rights and her community's future. A soft knock at the door preceded Ruth's entrance. The 6-year-old carried something wrapped in cloth. I found this in Aunt Martha's sewing box, she said, offering the bundle. She said I could give it to you. Kate unwrapped it to find a small brooch, silver filigree surrounding a pearl, simple but elegant. It's beautiful, Ruth. Aunt Martha said every lady needs something pretty for important days. Ruth watched as Kate pinned it to her collar. Is today important? Very important, Kate confirmed. Today we make sure our home stays ours. Ruth nodded, satisfied with this explanation. Mr. Thornton says home is more than just a place. It's the people who love you. Kate smiled, touching her daughter's cheek. He's right about that. He loves us, Ruth stated with childlike certainty. And you love him. Kate blinked, startled by her middle child's perception. What makes you say that? I see how you look at each other, like in my drawings. Ruth's solemn eyes studied her mother. It's okay to love him, Ma. Loving Mr. Thornton doesn't make loving Pa go away. Out of the mouths of babes, Kate thought, humbled by her daughter's wisdom. You're right, sweetheart. Love doesn't work that way. It grows to include more people, not less. Ruth seemed satisfied with this answer. Good, because I think we're supposed to be a family now. When the simplicity of the child's perspective brought tears to Kate's eyes. She hugged Ruth close, grateful for the uncomplicated acceptance that children could sometimes offer. Judge Hollister arrived precisely at noon, a tall, spare man with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes that suggested little escaped his notice. The hearing was held in the town hall, the only space large enough to accommodate the many residents who wished to witness the proceedings. Wells had been permitted to clean himself up for the hearing, but 3 days in a cell had diminished his usual pompous bearing. His lawyer, a nervous man summoned from the county seat, conferred with him in whispers as the room filled. Kate sat with Caleb and the children in the front row, Marshall Hayes beside them. Martha Sullivan occupied a place of honor, her bandaged head a visible reminder of Wells's methods. The hearing proceeded with the formality of law, yet held the narrative power of the stories told around winter fires. One by one, witnesses recounted Wells' threats, his manipulation of the town, his attempt to seize control of the valley's water for his exclusive benefit. Andrew's maps and journal were entered as evidence, his careful documentation providing the foundation for their case. Kate herself testified about the confrontation at the cabin, the abduction of her daughters, the ultimatum delivered. Wells' defense rested primarily on technical arguments about mineral rights, improper filing of deeds, legalistic dodges that seemed hollow against the human testimony of those he had wronged. When it was his turn to speak, Wells rose slowly, his eyes scanning the crowded room. You all see me as a monster, he began, voice steady, the greedy businessman willing to destroy lives for profit. But none of you knew me 30 years ago, when I arrived in this territory with nothing but the clothes on my back. His gaze hardened as he continued. I watched my father die of hunger during the drought of '55 because the landowners refused to share their well water with outsiders. I buried him myself at 13. Swore then that I'd never be at another man's mercy for something as essential as water. Kate exchanged a surprised glance with Caleb. This was a side of Wells they hadn't expected, a glimpse of the wounded boy behind the ruthless man. Everything I've built, Wells continued, every mine, every business has been to ensure control over my own destiny. This valley needs progress, industry, not just scattered farms clinging to the old ways. The mines bring stability, permanence. For a brief moment, Kate felt an unwilling flash of understanding. Not sympathy, Wells's actions remained unforgivable, but recognition of the broken path that had led him here. When all evidence had been presented, Judge Hollister removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully before addressing the packed hall. This court has heard compelling evidence of a systematic attempt to seize control of essential resources through intimidation, fraud, and violence, he began, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the room. While Mr. Wells and his counsel have raised technical objections regarding proper filing of water rights, they have failed to address the substantial evidence of coercion and illegal acts undertaken to secure those rights. He replaced his spectacles, consulting his notes. Based on the documentation provided by the late Andrew Hargrove, this court finds that the spring located on the Hargrove property constitutes a critical water source for the entire valley. As such, it is hereby designated a protected resource under territorial law, with access rights guaranteed to all landowners currently dependent upon it. A murmur of approval ran through the assembled townsfolk. The judge continued. Furthermore, Ezra Wells is remanded to custody on charges of kidnapping, assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making criminal threats. He will be transported to Helena for formal arraignment once weather permits. Wells surged to his feet. This is outrageous. A travesty of justice engineered by vengeful farmers and a woman too emotional to recognize progress. Silence, the judge thundered, his gavel cracking against the desk. One more outburst, Mr. Wells, and I'll add contempt of court to your charges. Wells subsided, face mottled with rage but contained. His lawyer tugged urgently at his sleeve, whispering what appeared to be advice to accept the ruling gracefully. This hearing is concluded, Judge Hollister announced. Marshal Hayes, please see to the prisoner's secure confinement until transport can be arranged. As Wells was led away, his eyes met Kate's across the room. For a moment, the mask of arrogance slipped, revealing something almost like regret. You know, he said quietly as he passed her, your husband tried to reason with me once, offered a compromise, shared water rights that would serve both the farms and the mines. Smart man. Then why didn't you listen? Kate asked. Wells' mouth twisted in a bitter smile. Because men like me don't know how to share what we've fought so hard to possess. He glanced at Caleb, then back to Kate. Maybe you're the fortunate one, Mrs. Hargrove. You've learned what I never could. Before she could respond, the marshal led him away, shoulders bent not just with defeat, but with the weight of a lifetime of wrong choices. As the crowd dispersed, filled with excited conversation about the victory, Kate remained seated, a strange numbness spreading through her. After so many months of fear and uncertainty, the sudden resolution left her feeling adrift. You all right? Caleb asked quietly, his hand finding hers. I think so, she replied. Just overwhelmed. It's really over. This part is, he agreed. What comes next is up to us. While Caleb took the girls to prepare the horses for the journey home, Kate found Timothy standing alone by the courthouse window, watching the street below with unusual solemnity for an 8-year-old boy. Everything all right, Tim? She asked, joining him at the window. He didn't answer immediately, his small fingers tracing patterns on the frost-rimmed glass. Pa's watch stopped yesterday, he said finally. I tried winding it, but it won't go. Kate touched the timepiece hanging from her son's pocket. Andrew's watch, the legacy he'd left for his son. We can ask Mr. Sullivan to look at it when the road's clear. He's good with watches. Timothy nodded, still not meeting her eyes. Ma, when you marry Mr. Thornton, will Pa still be part of our family? The question pierced Kate's heart. She knelt before her son, taking his small hands in hers. Timothy James Hargrove, listen to me. Your father will always be part of us. Always. Nothing can change that. Not time, not distance, not even new family joining us. But Mr. Thornton will be living in our house, sleeping in, he trailed off, his cheeks flushing. In the room where your father and I slept, Kate finished gently. Yes, but that doesn't erase your father. Just like that watch stopping doesn't erase all the times it kept perfect time for him and then for you. Timothy considered this, his young face working through complex emotions. I still miss him, Ma. Sometimes I wake up and forget he's gone. Then I remember. I know, sweetheart. I do too. Kate pulled him close, feeling the tension in his small shoulders. But you know what I think? I think your pa would be proud of you. How brave you've been, how you've helped me and your sisters. And I think he'd be glad about Mr. Thornton. Because of the coin? Timothy asked against her shoulder. Because of the coin, Kate agreed, and because your father wanted us to be safe and happy. Mr. Thornton helps with both those things, doesn't he? Timothy pulled back slightly, his expression serious as he considered the question. He teaches me things, like Pa would have. A pause, then, and he makes you smile again. Kate felt tears spring to her eyes. Yes, he does. Then I think it's okay. Timothy reached up and solemnly wiped a tear from her cheek. Pa would say it's okay. Kate hugged him tightly, marveling at the wisdom in her young son's heart. Thank you, Tim. When they separated, Timothy had a determined look that reminded her so much of Andrew, it made her heart ache. He carefully tucked the stopwatch back in his pocket. Maybe I'll keep it just like this, he decided, to remember the time when Pa was with us. And then maybe Mr. Thornton can help me find a new one, for the time that's coming. Kate could only nod, too moved to speak. Her son, still so young, yet finding his way through grief with such grace. As they turned to join the others, Timothy slipped his hand into hers, a gesture he'd recently deemed too childish. Today it seemed he needed the connection as much as she did. Just before they reached the courthouse door, where Caleb waited with the girls, Timothy squeezed her hand. Ma, I'm glad we're not alone anymore. So am I, Tim, she whispered. So am I. The children had been remarkably patient throughout the proceedings, but now their energy reasserted itself. Timothy pulled at Caleb's sleeve. Can we go home now, Mr. Thornton? To our cabin? If that's what you want, Caleb replied, looking to Kate for confirmation. She nodded. Yes, let's go home. They said their goodbyes to Martha, promising to return soon for a proper visit once things settled. The marshal assured them Wells would remain secure until his transfer to face formal charges. The townspeople, many of whom had shunned Kate after Andrew's death, now approached with congratulations and offers of assistance. The ride back to the cabin was challenging through the deep snow, but filled with a lightness that had been absent on their journey to town. Timothy rode ahead with Caleb, learning to navigate the drifts, while Kate followed with the girls, Clara bundled before her on the saddle, Ruth riding her own pony with newfound confidence. The cabin appeared as they crested the final rise, smoke already rising from the chimney. Samuel Kearney had evidently kept his promise to check on the place during their absence. Look, Clara pointed excitedly, it's our house. Yes, little one, Kate agreed, emotion catching in her throat. Our home. Caleb had reined in, waiting for them to draw alongside. In the late afternoon light, with the cabin before them and the vast Montana sky above, he looked at Kate with a question in his eyes that needed no words. She smiled, her answer equally clear. This was their beginning, not erasing what came before, but building upon it, creating something new and strong from the foundations Andrew had laid. As they approached the cabin, the children riding ahead in excitement, Caleb guided his horse closer to Kate's, their knees nearly touching. All these months, he said, voice low enough that only she could hear, I told myself I was keeping a promise to Andrew. That's why I stayed. His eyes, clear and direct, met hers. But that's not the whole truth anymore. Kate felt her heart quicken, understanding the confession he was making. The walls they'd both built around their grief were finally coming down completely. I know, she said, the words simple but carrying the weight of everything between them. I love you too. The naked emotion that crossed his face, surprise, wonder, joy, was worth every hardship they'd endured. For a man so guarded, so controlled, the transformation was like watching ice break on a spring river. I never thought I'd hear those words again, he said roughly, or that I'd say them and mean them as I do now. I love you, Kate Hargrove. You and those children have brought me back to life. They rode the final distance to the cabin in a silence filled with promise, the winter sun casting their shadows long across the unblemished snow. Ahead, the children had already dismounted, running toward the door, eager to be home. Home, Kate thought. Not just the cabin with its solid walls built against the wilderness, but these people, this feeling of belonging, of safety found in each other rather than mere shelter. As they reached the cabin, Caleb dismounted first, then lifted his arms to help Kate down. But instead of setting her immediately on her feet, he held her suspended for a moment, their faces close, breath mingling in the cold air. Welcome home, he whispered and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful of the watching children, yet filled with the promise of deeper passion to come. Kate leaned into it, one hand rising to touch his scarred cheek, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her fingers, the warmth of his skin despite the winter cold. When they parted, the children were watching with varying reactions. Timothy with solemn approval, Ruth with quiet satisfaction, Clara with delighted giggles. A family being rebuilt, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by continuing to live, to love, to grow. Inside, the cabin welcomed them with familiar smells and sights. The wood smoke, the line of carved animals on the windowsill, the quilt Kate had pieced during long winter evenings. But it felt different now, transformed by the journey they had taken and the bonds they had formed. As darkness fell and the children settled into their beds, Kate and Caleb sat by the fire, planning the future in quiet voices. The spring would be protected, the community's water rights secure. There would be a proper burial for Andrew come thaw, honoring his foresight and courage. And there would be a wedding, simple but joyous, binding them together officially as they were already bound in heart. Walls aren't just for keeping things out, Kate observed, watching the firelight play across Caleb's features. They're for sheltering what matters. And what matters most is right here, Caleb agreed, his arm drawing her closer against his side. Everything we need, everything worth protecting. Outside, the winter winds sang around the eaves of the cabin they had built together. Kate and Andrew first, then Kate and Caleb, completing what had been started. Inside, warmth and light pushed back the darkness, creating a sanctuary not just of logs and mortar, but of love and commitment and shared purpose. The walls they had built stood strong against the wilderness, sheltering the most precious thing of all a family forged in loss but tempered by love, finding its way forward together. Spring came to the Montana Valley like a long-held promise finally kept. The snow retreated up the mountainsides, leaving behind a carpet of wildflowers that reminded Kate of her first days in this territory, when Andrew had picked a bouquet and tucked a blossom behind her ear. "You're thinking of him," Caleb said, finding Kate on the porch one morning, gazing toward the greening hills. "Yes," she admitted, but not with sadness anymore. The winter had brought many changes. True to Wells's fears, more settlers had arrived once news spread of the protected water rights, families seeking honest lives on good land. Samuel Kearney had organized a community planting day, ensuring every homestead had a proper vegetable garden. Timothy raced across the yard, a wooden wolf in his hand, the latest of Caleb's carvings. Ruth followed with Clara, both girls wearing the new dresses Martha had helped sew for the upcoming wedding. The date was set for the summer solstice, the longest day of light in a year that had begun in darkness. That evening, with the children asleep, Kate and Caleb walked to Andrew's Orambam. The wooden cross now stood beside a proper headstone, paid for by the community fund established from the small gold deposits Andrew had discovered. Enough to benefit the valley, not enough to destroy it. "I think he'd approve," Caleb said quietly, his arm around Kate's shoulders. "Of us, or of how things turned out?" "Both." They had planted flowers around the grave, not as a monument to grief, but as a celebration of life continuing, of growth from loss, of walls torn down and rebuilt stronger. As they walked back to the cabin, their home, The last light of day gilded the valley, turning ordinary things to gold. A fitting alchemy for a place where people had discovered that the true wealth lay not in what could be taken from the earth, but in what they gave to each other. "I never thought I'd find this again," Kate said as they reached the porch. "Home, family, hope." Caleb's kiss was his answer, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.